Welcome into a crossover edition of Locked On Seminoles and Locked On Gators. I am the host of Locked On Seminoles, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. This is my cohort, Brandon Olsen, unfortunate crazy Gator fan living in New York. I don't know how you do that. But today, Brandon, we've done many shows together over the last year, but it's a very unique show because both programs, how should I say this, are not where they want to be. Yeah, that.
Inky.
And quite frankly, they are very, very difficult to understand, like with their coaching decisions. And I just want to kind of give a baseline to everybody on coaching, what's ahead, keeping your guys on your roster, which I think you and I agree is a major concern, adding somebody in the portal, and how does it work with the timing with recruiting? Because everything's just happening at once between now and the end of December. Like, the rosters for both teams are going to look massively different, and that includes the coaching staffs, potentially. So I'm going to just lead off here. Florida makes the announcement on Billy, and I'm just going to let you make your own comments and why you think they did what they did. Have at it.
I think, okay, first off, it's loser mentality to keep him. Want to make that abundantly clear. Upper administration, Scott Strickland included, every single booster that has an opinion that can actually be influential, spineless loser and coward, and you're accepting the death of Florida football if things continue to go the way that they do. But I think that if you make the bad decision to keep Billy Napier, then you needed to put out that statement by Scott Strickland in order to give yourself a fighting chance on the recruiting trail, because the main negative recruiting thing for Billy Napier for over a year now has been he's not going to be there long, because the 2024 class, Jameer Grimsley was deciding between Florida and Alabama. And he publicly in media was saying, hey, I'm iffy on Florida. Like, I want to go to Florida. I'm a Gators fan, always have been, but I'm iffy on Florida because I don't know how long Billy Napier is going to be there. And so I don't want to commit to a coach that gets fired. And then he committed to Alabama and Nick Saban, and then Nick Saban retired, and Jameer Grimsley flipped right to Billy Napier. So it was pretty clear, at least I thought, that he really was deciding between his coaches, picked the one that he thought had more stability, and then the guy retired and came back. And so this is not a new thing that Florida's been dealing with of, hey, Billy Napier's not going to be there long. But this at least gives you, well, I'll be here next year, guys, and trying to get some of the 2025 kids, where we've seen some of the best kids on the team right now have been 2024 kids or 2023 kids. It's the youth that's really driving a lot of this team right now. So I think that you had to put out the statement if you're going to keep him. I just think it was brain dead to decide to keep him.
Could you give a synopsis on what the buyout would be? Because this is part of the factor, and it's what I'm going to go into with Florida State right after that.
Yeah, his buyout at the start of the season was about $27 million. By the end of the season, it'll be at about $19 million. And so right now it's around $22 million because Scott Strickland got demolished by Jimmy Sexton at the negotiating table, because if Billy Napier is fired at any point without cause, he's owed 85% of his remaining contract. So he could have gotten hired and fired the next day, and he would have still gotten 85% of his total contract. And so, yeah, that's how it decreases, but very marginally, because you're still paying him a salary. And so you're really not saving much money by keeping him. You're kind of just kicking the can down the road.
Okay. On Florida State side, it sounds like Florida, at least now, because Billy is in year 3, Florida State just re-upped Norvell. Totally different scenario. The last I saw, the Tallahassee Democrat had something that said $63.8 million, and that's in the last couple of weeks. That was like beginning of the season. Let's just say for funsies that it's $50 million. That's still a ridiculous amount. It's more than that. It's probably 60 or so, give or take, or upper 50s. It's too much is how I've had it described to me. Therefore, and I don't know on this, and I said so on my Locked On Seminoles pod, I'm not sure that Norvell made those decisions because he's a very loyal guy, but they just fired both coordinators as well as former Florida State player Ron Dugans. He played in the mid-90s with Cannell and some of those great Florida State teams. But here's the deal. Look, Florida State, they're not in a good spot. Kind of like you said, because, I mean, they got more going on. They got the ACC trial. And beyond that, they're in the midst, just by timing, with all these stadium renovations. It's like $200 million. Like, it's insane how much money they have allocated to football and stuff that has nothing to do with day to day. So I understand it, but they're awful. They're 1-9. They are literally dead last in college football in scoring at 13.3 points per game. At no point should Florida State, or Florida for that matter, ever be dead last or anything close to it in scoring. This staff has failed beyond anything I've ever seen from one year to the next. Does Mike Norvell deserve to be fired? Probably so. I think so, and I've said so many times on my pod. Just wanted to state that for the record. But now, and I'll answer this as well, but I'm going to give you first shot. Does UF make any, for lack of a better term, major coaching changes? And if so, which spots are they going to catch up with Florida State, I guess? Because I think they're going to be competing for some coaches potentially.
Yeah, I am begging Billy Napier to fire Rob Sale at this point. Like, there's no point in having Rob Sale still on your staff. I understand your offensive line looks better this year than they looked last year, but think about it this way. Of your top 5 guys, your starters, your best players are Jake Slaughter, Mullen recruit, Austin Barber, Mullen recruit, Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, San Diego State player for 4 years, and then transferred in here to get a shot at the SEC before the NFL. You're in year 3, and your best players are 2 Mullen guys and a transfer that came in. This is not a tough decision, I think. Recruiting on the offensive line hasn't been good enough. You've brought in good players, Rod Kearney, Najee Harris, Jason Zandamella, Fletcher Westfall are both promising kids. Haven't really seen them much this year. Obviously, true freshman on the offensive line.
Right.
But you've brought in good players. The issue is that you don't bring in nearly enough good players. Even if you assume, hey, half of all offensive line commits, which would still be favorable there, let's say half of them work out, you're still only bringing in 3 or 4 every year. You simply don't have the numbers on the offensive line recruiting-wise. And I don't think that there's worth keeping 2 offensive line coaches, one of them getting paid $1 million to be an offensive coordinator that doesn't call plays. I think that Billy needs an offensive coordinator. Not that I think the offensive system is horrible. I think that's where I disagree with a lot of Florida Gators fans. I don't think the offensive system is horrible. I think Billy Napier is just a bad play caller at it. And I think that that's where I go there. Defensively, Ron Roberts should be fired. I don't think Mike Peterson's a very good edge coach. I mean, it's especially damning that you look at the edge guys that they've let walk out of the room, and Antoine Powell-Ryland has been killing it at Virginia Tech. He left under Napier. You look at Princely Umanmielen has 10 sacks on one of the best defenses in the country with Ole Miss. He left because of coaching, explicitly because of coaching and how they were using him, because he didn't want to drop back into coverage on 25% of his snaps. Crazy that an edge rusher would want to actually rush the passer. So I think there's some guys that need to go, but I do think that this coaching staff has people I'd keep. You know, Russ Callaway, tight end / co-OC, I'd keep him. I'd keep Jabbar Jalouk as your running back coach. I don't know where you land on Billy Gonzalez or where you land on Jonathan DeCoster, the second offensive line coach, but I think he might be, we'll say, a casualty with Rob Sale. And then defensively, I'd keep Will Harris, at least for now. I'd keep Gerald Chapman as the defensive line coach. This staff has guys that you should keep, but they have guys that you also should clearly get rid of.
Do you think the defensive coordinator spot is in jeopardy?
I think Austin Armstrong should be back. I think that Billy Napier made a mistake by ever giving play calling duty to Ron Roberts to start the year, because when Ron Roberts got hired, Billy Napier said, it's still Austin's defense. Ron Roberts is just coming in to help him out a bit. And then at the start of the season, it was Ron Roberts calling plays, and Ron Roberts was on the sideline, and Austin Armstrong was in the booth, which is also another example of incompetent coaching, because why would you put the most fired up guy on the coaching staff in the booth and put the senior citizen coach on the sideline, and it should clearly be the opposite side there. So I think Austin Armstrong should be back. I think Austin Armstrong should be calling plays. And I think Ron Roberts should get the boot there for multiple reasons, both on and off field.
Not really going to disagree with anything you said there. As for Florida State, they got rid of both coordinators. Alex Atkins obviously needed to go. He was the O-line coach. I mean, Florida State's O-line. There's no discussion needed. And he was the guy that designed the play. I know Norvell calls them kind of like Billy, but come on, they're terrible. On the defensive side, Fuller was solid, but he'd been solid forever. Just there was never any getting over the hump with them. And then their lack of effort, like against Carolina and then Notre Dame. They had loafs in the first series against Notre Dame. I mean, and they're just not good enough in recruiting. Any Florida State podcast you go to, they'll talk about that. So that is a problem, as the saying goes. When we come back, I'm going to discuss a little bit more with Brandon about the coaching, but we're going to get into something that is very concerning. That's the recruiting struggle with coaching changes, December 4th signing day. That's going to be next here on this Locked On crossover with Locked On Seminoles and Locked On Gators. Have you downloaded the Gametime app yet? Gametime allows you to go to a concert. It allows you to go to a football game, basketball game, a play, whatever it is that you like. They also have something called Gametime Picks. It filters out all the fluff to show you only the credible deals and get great seats. So you don't have to go waste time searching through thousands of tickets. But when you do find a ticket, whether it's a Florida game, Florida State game, or whatever, my favorite feature about Gametime is simple. You're able to see from your seat what the venue looks like. Whether it's a pitcher's mound, it's the stage at a play, whatever it may be, you're able to see it right from your phone. I'm not the most patient guy. I want things done quickly, and this is something that Gametime does very, very well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right. Now, the big question, Brandon, December 4th is National Signing Day. I've looked at Florida's class, and there's a specific player I want to ask you about here in a minute, but I'll also give you the chance to kind of thumbnail through it. Do you think Florida is in danger? You and I talked 2 or 3 weeks ago via text, and you were really concerned about several guys. Things change. They had the announcement since then, so please just give your 2 cents on where Florida stands with the current commits, and do you think they're in play for anybody else?
Yeah, I think that they'll lose some kids, but I do think that the announcement has helped them. Look, I know how I feel about Billy. I know how a lot of fans feel about Billy, but the fact remains that players like him, parents like him. Like Billy's a likable guy. He's just not good enough to win games consistently at Florida, in my opinion. But I do think that I was told that, hey, we're going to wait for Billy to get fired before we make a decommitment. Like we might take some off. We might take some visits elsewhere, but we're going to wait until Billy's fired. Like, and if Billy's here, Billy's our coach. And that seems to be the sentiment where Billy's going to be here. So a lot of kids are going to be locked in. I still obviously know that they are going to get recruited elsewhere. We'll see. And I'm sure you'll lose some kids. Nashawn Montgomery has kind of seemed like he's been 1 foot out the door. But again, that was all before the announcement became official. Because I do think if you were a kid that was going to flip after Billy got fired, you were doing yourself a disservice by not entertaining other schools. And so I think that now the official announcement has come out, we'll see if kids that have visits set up decide to cancel those visits elsewhere and see if they want to, lock in again with Florida. But I think that, and also one of the reasons that Florida, if you're going to fire any assistant coaches, you need to do it now, is so that you can reestablish relationships with these kids. If you're going to fire, we'll say Billy Gonzalez, just because Vernell Brown's your top ranked kid right now. So if you're going to fire Billy Gonzalez, you need to find a new wide receiver coach as quickly as you can so that he can talk to Vernell Brown, that he can talk to Nashawn Montgomery, and he can say, hey, this is our plan at receiver. This is what we're going to do. And he can reestablish that relationship with these recruits. Because I think that's one of the reasons that Norvell made the announcement when he made the announcement to get rid of Atkins and all of the assistant coaches that they did get rid of, is because, hey, we have whiffed on high school recruiting for a large portion of Mike Norvell's tenure at Florida State. Let's make some decisions and make some announcements here so that we can try to salvage this class, which I think that's one of the things you see from the early signing day is now a lot more schools are playing defense essentially when they go, hey, we need to be more aggressive, make these decisions, make these firings, make these hirings so that when it comes time for early signing day, we're in a good spot. And then we can focus on the portal.
I agree with all that. Florida State got out ahead of it. I thought Florida was going to do that first, to be honest.
They should.
They didn't. Well, I want to touch here in a second on a few coaching names and whatnot. But right now, as always, Florida State are battling for certain kids. Florida's not going to give up on Solomon Thomas. For the record, and I know I've stated this, it is not the most likely that the Noles hold on to him. And I'm going to be honest, I get the fortunate opportunity to see kids across the country. Solomon Thomas is one of the most physically imposing, most motivated, physically just scary guys that you'd ever have to go up against. Florida State can't afford to lose him, but they might lose out of their 4 O-line recruits because they lost Atkins, who was OC and offensive line. They could lose any number of those players. It's crazy. And I know Florida's kind of in a similar situation. Florida State might be worse because they've already made assistant coaches go away. Do you think, like Jalen Wiggins is a kid that Florida State's trying to get? I think he's more likely to go to Notre Dame than Florida State. He was at the Florida State game and just watched him get annihilated at Notre Dame Stadium, 52-3. Have you heard anything on him? And I'm also interested in Ben Hanks. There's been a lot of rumblings about Miami because he plays at Booker T down there in the city of Miami. Any news on them or any vibe that you've heard?
Well, Ben Hanks was one that prior to the announcement, I kind of thought would be on the way out. Wouldn't shock me if he still was on the way out. And I know a lot of Florida Gators fans get very angry about that with their with the legacy kid leaving. I have said multiple times, I don't think legacy means as much as people think it does anymore. I think a lot of these kids actually want to go to other schools and kind of start their own legacy and make their own name. That's every teenager I've been around has wanted to do things opposite of their parents lately. And so when I think of these kids as legacies, I don't think it's as strong a selling point as people think it is anymore. Wouldn't shock me if Ben Hanks Jr. left, but also I do know that, Will Harris has been trying to lock in any DB commits that they can get lately, and Ben Hanks right now, the only blue chip corner you have committed. Jalen Wiggins is someone that the moment he committed to Florida, you and I were talking about it as well, would be kind of surprised if he stuck, just because his commitment came kind of out of nowhere too. It wasn't one that we really were expecting to happen when it happened. I'm honestly surprised that he's been committed for 10 months at this point, because it felt like when he committed that this was going to be one that wouldn't last. I know that he's still talking publicly about Florida positively, but it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if he were to flip. I mean, especially you see what Notre Dame can do. You see what Notre Dame did to Florida State, another school that he was looking at, and you go, oh, well, I kind of want to be a part of that. But I do think that Florida's defense, I think the whole they're playing hard thing is pathetic, but I do think that you can see the Florida defense and you can at least say, hey, look, they've got promise, that they've like a little bit more talent and you're looking good out there. And I know that people, Florida Gators fans, love the talent that you have there right now. The guy that people go, oh, he's the best defensive end on Florida, and Jack Pyburn, he's got 3 pressures right now. I think
it's not a good sign.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at an upgrade in talent with how you've got guys overperforming right now, I think Jalen Wiggins can go, hey, I can come in and play early. I mean, Mekhi Boyero has played a ton of snaps on the defensive line this year. DeAndre Robinson's played a ton of snaps on the defensive line this year. Young guys have a path to playing time, and I think that Jalen Wiggins sees that, and I do think that it still matters that, hey, you could do that at the SEC level.
I'll be curious to see where Jalen goes. Same thing with Ben. I've heard different things on Wiggins, whether it's going to be UF or Notre Dame. I don't think he knows yet. But signing day is 22 days from now. So it's getting down to the nitty gritty. So we'll see. And again, he was in South Bend. Anybody in particular besides those two that you're worried about? Tayshawn Gelsey's a kid that I know Florida State offered recently, so I'm kind of curious about him. Florida State's recruiting him as a receiver. Is UF receiver, tight end, or the end? They don't know.
He'd be a tight end with Florida right now. That's
okay.
As bad an idea as that is. And I don't think it's a bad idea with anything to do with his talent. I think that you can look at how Arliss Boardingham has not developed at tight end and not been good at tight end. And I think you could say, hey, Florida wants the blocking, gritty tight ends. And they've been better with those kinds of Hayden Hansen, Tony Livingston. There's a reason that they are your starting tight ends right now instead of Arliss Boardingham. Amir Jackson has been a non-factor, which, by the way, I will pat myself on the back for, because people go, oh, he's going to be so good as a freshman. There is no shot he was ever going to play. There's no shot Tayshawn Gelsey is going to play as a freshman either, unless he does go to receiver full time, which I still don't think is a good decision for him. I think that, becoming that mismatch nightmare at tight end is the best role for him instead of doing the Johnny Wilson thing for Florida State. I do think that tight end would be the best spot for Gelsey. And that's how Florida's recruiting him. That's how Florida wants to use him. And Florida does want to have tight ends more viable in the passing game, but they haven't put anything to proof that they can actually do that with tight ends and use them properly there.
That is wild. I think Gelsey's a little underrated. I think he's a pretty good prospect. He's from the Jacksonville area. As for Florida State, I don't think there's anybody that's safe. Their tight end commitment, Lofton's from Nebraska. He's probably not real thrilled right now. Which guys go? I get those questions, like who's the specific coaches. I have some names I'm looking into. I know the 24/7 Knoll site has some names up for coordinator, et cetera. But it is very early. I'm not going to ask you like who Florida's going to try to hire. We need other things to happen first, another week or so. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more in regards to Florida State and Florida, but this time it's about the portal. You got to keep your players, and they both also need to try to find a way to bring in some after a really bad season. That is next here on this crossover of Locked On Seminoles and Locked On Gators. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. All right. The portal. Brandon. Just going to go shoot for the moon here. Over under, before we get to adding players, how many players do you think will hit the portal from Florida's roster? Over under 15.
Are we talking about actual contributors or just roster in general?
Roster in general. We'll go. We can get to that one next. That's a great follow-up question.
I'd say over, just because I do think Florida's trying to be like they're near the scholarship limit. They're not a very senior team. And I could see young guys leaving for whatever reason. But I also think Florida wants to be really aggressive in the portal. They've said, hey, we're keeping Billy. We're going to spend some of that buyout money on NIL with portal and high school recruiting. Guys have to leave. And there's also going to be guys that want to leave to better themselves. Like Marcus Burke, I could see leaving immediately.
He's a solid player.
Yeah, I think he's fine, but he hasn't been playing that much, and he hasn't been part of the offense. So why stay when you've got one more year to prove to NFL teams that you can be a viable receiver?
I also agree on Florida. I think it'll be somewhere between 17 and 20. Could be a little more than that if there's any discipline problems, academics, whatever. As for Florida State, here's my concern, and I mentioned this recently on Locked On Seminoles. I'm not just worried about the number. but I'm worried about the quality factor. That's the follow-up. I think Florida State's going to be 20 minimum. So, and I'll get into the whole who, what, when, where, and why next, but which players are you worried they're going to lose from the Florida roster? Like, okay, this is somebody that has a future, but I can see him bolting. Is there anybody specific or anything that you're concerned about there in general?
I feel like you kind of have to bring up the name that is thrown into the portal by every fan. Every year, Andy Jean is gonna every year. Andy Jean's leaving. I think this might actually be the year where he actually heads out. I don't think there's a ton of guys that are actually contributors that are going to be gone. I think that's another part of it. But I could see like a Kelby Collins leaving. Kelby Collins is falling completely out of the rotation at this point. I'd be interested to see what happens with a Trey Wilson. Trey Wilson has banged up this year after what was expected to be a big jump. But I think for him, his usage has been dog crap. Even when he was healthy, they were still doing the little jet sweep stuff with him. And I think that, I don't think saying, oh, he's a gadget is as bad a thing as it used to be. I think when you look at modern football, a lot of offenses use gadgets in different ways. But the thing is that Billy almost exclusively used Trey Wilson as just a gadget receiver. And that doesn't help you when you're showing off for the NFL. Like, they're just going to look at you, see Florida guy, gadget, Kadarius Toney, bust. Don't even look at him. And I think that Trey Wilson is a much better receiver than Kadarius Toney, but they're going to see a gadget out of Florida and say that's what he's going to be, and he's not going to work out that way. And so I could see him leaving and say, you know what, I'm going to go to an offense that uses me as a wide receiver and not jet motion position.
Well, with Florida State, and losing Wilson would be a death knell for DJ Lagway, et cetera, because he's an explosive player. Florida State fans will see him soon enough when they come up to Doak Campbell in a couple weeks. For Florida State, it's a little bit different for me. I'm worried about all the 2024 recruits just kind of across the board. They're freshmen. Some have played. They played quite a few of them. Matter of fact, Landon Thomas, I believe, started the Notre Dame game, if I remember right, but he's our primary tight end right now. Amari Williams doesn't go far behind that as another primary, but they're like Kai Bates got into the game. The sophomore class, they've got several guys like KJ Kirkland, Conrad Hussey. They're basically starters, co-starters. They've got a bunch of young players on defense, but on offense, you also have Cam Davis. You got your freshman quarterback. I highly doubt he leaves. Luke Kromenhoek, with the way things are going, I can't rule out anything. So while I think they're going to lose 20 or more players, and 20 is probably, I think so. Well, I think 22, 23 is probably right. I think it's going to be mass. Unfortunately, I'm worried that 2 or 3 really key guys are going to walk out the door. And I'm not really sure there's much you can do about it because the timing. I just want to state this isn't a Florida State problem. This is all programs. With December 4th being signing day, it's the first Wednesday, not the third now. The portal opens on the 9th. It closes on January 7th. That's just when you can enter. You can sign later, but most kids want to get it done by early January so they can enroll with their new school. You're going to have coaching changes at UF soon. Florida State's already got them. These players, just like with recruiting, how much of a relationship are they going to have? So I think whatever coaches come to Florida and Florida State, you might see whatever schools they're at. Again, that could be anywhere. A player or two from that school comes because they already know them. They have a relationship built. We talk about it all the time when I come on your show to discuss recruiting for the Gators. It's very simple. Players pick coaches far more often than they pick schools. I know fans hate that. It's not changing. And that's just the way it is. So I expect the Gators and Knowles to have some success that way. But here's the big $1 million question. You said they've got cash lined up at UF. I don't know what Florida State's situation is, to be honest. I'll leave that alone. But do you think they're going to go, big fish just try to get 2 or 3, like, for an example, D tackle is really hard because it's super expensive because there's a low number that everybody wants every year. Do you think they're going to go show out $800,000 for a 1-year, 5th-year transfer that's, got a chance to be a 3rd-round draft pick the year after? Or do you think they're more likely to shell out $450 for a couple guys that are pretty good, especially if they have more than 1 year of eligibility?
I think they're swinging for big fish because I think that you have to look at – I don't think Florida's a win-now team, but I think you have to take a win-now approach because
Yeah,
everybody knows.
contract situation.
Everybody knows Billy Napier made it to 2025 by the skin of his teeth. And so you need to win as many games as you possibly can. Next year, your schedule, a lot of quarterbacks on that schedule, which, by the way, Jesse Palmer with absolute loser mentality during the Texas game of going, oh, well, next you keep Billy Napier because next year your schedule is going to have Jackson Dart's going to be gone and Carson Beck's going to be gone and Quinn Ewers is going to be gone. And you're going to have all these QBs that you're facing this year aren't going to be there next year. So you've got a better chance at winning. What a loser mentality that is. I don't care who's there. Beat the crap out of him. You're keeping a lame duck coach because the other teams suck. Come on now.
That made no sense at all. That's not very logical.
Exactly.
You get the best coach regardless of your schedule.
Exactly. But I think Florida knows, hey, we need to capitalize and win 8 or 9 games next year. And so we will sell out to go win those games. And 2026, we will worry about if we have a down year, what happens then. But we need to win games in 2025 in order to make it to 2026.
I agree with that. As for Florida State, I don't know how this is going to work, but I just think they're going to struggle because they lost both coordinators. I give them credit for being proactive in doing so, but I don't know what their NIL is going to be, and I don't know if it's a philosophy of go big or not, because it may change. Because if I'm right and they lose 20 or more players to the portal, you can't just go big because you got to fill out your roster. I don't think this recruiting class is going to be great. Both programs are like 12, 13 recruits right now. Neither one of them is where they need to be with the high school kids. So you got to fill out your roster with the portal, which means you got to pay. And it gets really, really dicey. So the timing for UF and for Florida State, and by the way, Norvell even said, we'd like to have our coaches by national signing. That's not realistic. Background checks, all that stuff. And these coaches are still other places. Come on. That's not realistic for Florida or Florida State. It's just a timing issue. That is what it is. I think both programs are going to be in for very unique Decembers. Some good, some bad, because the only thing they control is the money they spend on the coaches. Players are fickle. It can be the most obvious choice in the world to go to Florida, for example, but you're dealing with somewhere between a 17 and 22-year-old. Yeah, that's very rough. So any last thoughts, Brandon, about Florida's soon-to-be turbulent offseason?
I just think it's very I revel in chaos, and so I do think it's very funny that Florida and Florida State are just horrendous. Whenever everyone knew Florida would be, but the Florida State one, I was skeptical, but I didn't think 1-9 bad was going to be a thing. It's going to be very interesting. I do think that it's also a bad time to be bad with all of the changes that have happened with early signing day being moved up. Like, this is a bad year to need to deal with all of these things, and how coaches across the country manage things with I mean, like you said, 22 days away, early signing day. With how coaches manage this, you'll find out which program will be able to bounce back relatively quickly, because, man, it's a brutal time to have a bad year right now.
I can't disagree with that. And I don't think it's a great year for obvious head coaching candidates. I think that also impacts why Norvell and Napier are likely headed back to Tallahassee and Gainesville. Could be wrong. But anyway, for Brandon Olsen, you can find him at WNS_Brandon. You can find me at FBScout_Florida, both of us on X. Thank you very much to everyone. You all have a great one. See you soon.